The sound of hoofbeats thundering behind her meant only one thing. They were getting closer, and Clara Owens had nowhere left to run. Her horse was exhausted, foam flecking its mouth as she urged it forward through the dusty streets of White River, South Dakota. The wanted posters with her face had been plastered across 3 territories now, each one declaring her guilty of murder and theft. Each one a lie that had turned her life into a waking nightmare. The year was 1881, and justice in the Dakota Territory was swift and brutal, especially for a woman accused of killing a wealthy rancher's son. Clara's dark hair had come loose from its pins, whipping around her face as she desperately searched for somewhere, anywhere to hide. The sun was setting, painting the sky blood red, which felt grimly appropriate. She had maybe minutes before the bounty hunters caught up to her. Her hands trembled on the reins as she turned down a narrow alley between 2 buildings, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. That was when she saw him. A tall cowboy stood in the doorway of a stable, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He wore a worn leather vest over a dusty blue shirt, and his hat was pushed back just enough that she could see his face in the dying light. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment they simply stared at each other, and Clara felt time slow to a crawl. "Please," she gasped, sliding from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "They're coming. I didn't do what they say I did. I swear to God I didn't kill anyone." The cowboy's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Behind her, she could hear shouting, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. He made a decision in that split second that would change both their lives forever. "Get inside," he said, his voice low and rough. "Now." Clara didn't hesitate. She stumbled into the stable and he grabbed her horse's reins, quickly leading it inside as well. The stable was dim and smelled of hay and leather, and he guided her swiftly to the back, where a ladder led up to a hayloft. "Up there," he commanded. "Stay silent no matter what you hear." She climbed as fast as her shaking limbs would allow, burrowing into the hay just as the stable doors burst open. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing, her entire body trembling. "You there," a rough voice called out. "We're looking for a woman. Dark hair, riding a gray mare. You seen her?" From her hiding place, Clara could just barely see through gaps in the floorboards. The cowboy who had helped her was calmly brushing down a chestnut horse, his movements unhurried and unconcerned. "Seen a lot of folks pass through today," he replied evenly. "What she wanted for?" "Murder and robbery," another voice chimed in. "There's a $1,000 bounty on her head. She killed Thomas Blackthorne, son of the biggest rancher in Wyoming Territory, shot him dead and stole his money." Clara closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Thomas Blackthorne had tried to force himself on her when she worked as a seamstress in his father's household. She had fought him off, and in the struggle, he had fallen and struck his head on the fireplace. When she had fled in terror, his father had declared her a murderer, using his wealth and influence to paint her as a cold-blooded killer. "That's a serious accusation," the cowboy said, "but I haven't seen any woman matching that description. You're welcome to look around if you like." Clara's heart stopped. Was he betraying her after all? But then she heard the weariness in one of the bounty hunter's voices. "It's getting dark. If she came through here, she's long gone by now. We'll check the other end of town." "Good luck to you," the cowboy said mildly. The sound of retreating hoofbeats felt like salvation. Clara remained frozen in the hay, not daring to move until she heard the stable doors close and the cowboy's voice calling up softly. "They're gone. You can come down now." Her legs were so stiff with fear and exhaustion that she nearly fell climbing down the ladder. Strong hands caught her waist, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into that weathered face. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safe for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "Maybe," he said, releasing her but not stepping back. "Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable. Those men will be back and they'll search more thoroughly next time. You need to tell me the truth. Did you kill Thomas Blackthorne?" Clara met his eyes steadily, even though tears were streaming down her face. "No, I swear on everything holy I did not murder him. He tried to force himself on me. I fought him off and he fell. It was an accident. But his father has money and power, and I'm just a seamstress with no family and no one to speak for me. Who would believe my word against his?" The cowboy studied her face for a long moment, and Clara held her breath. Finally, he nodded slowly. "My name is Ethan Lawson," he said. "And I believe you." Those 4 words hit Clara like a physical blow. She felt her knees buckle, and Ethan caught her again, this time supporting her weight as she sobbed into his chest. He smelled like leather and sage and safety, and she clung to him like a drowning woman to driftwood. "Easy now," he murmured, one hand coming up to awkwardly pat her back. "You're safe here. For tonight, at least." When she finally got control of herself, Clara pulled back, wiping at her face with dusty hands. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have involved you in this. If they find out you helped me, you could be arrested too." "Let me worry about that," Ethan said. He guided her to a bench along the wall and pressed her down onto it. "When did you last eat?" The question made Clara realize she was dizzy with hunger. 2 days ago, maybe 3. I don't remember." Ethan shook his head and disappeared into a small room at the back of the stable. He returned a few minutes later with bread, cheese, and a canteen of water. Clara tried to eat slowly, but she was so hungry that she devoured the food in minutes. Ethan watched her with an expression that might have been pity or might have been something else entirely. "You can't stay in South Dakota," he said once she had finished. "The bounty will follow you everywhere. The only way you'll ever be free is if someone proves your innocence." "How?" Clara asked bitterly. "Thomas Blackthorne's father owns half of Wyoming territory. No lawman will go against him." "Maybe not in Wyoming," Ethan agreed, "but there are other authorities. Federal marshals, for one. If we could get evidence that contradicts the story Blackthorne is telling, we might be able to get the bounty lifted." Clara stared at him. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do," he said finally. "I know what it's like when no one believes you and there's nowhere to turn. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." There was a story there, Clara could tell, but she didn't press him. Instead, she asked, "What do you suggest we do? First, we keep you hidden until those bounty hunters move on. Then we head back to Wyoming territory quietly. We find someone who was in that house the night Thomas died. A servant, maybe, or someone else who saw what happened. We get them to tell the truth." "That's impossible," Clara said. "Even if someone did see something, they'd never speak against the Blackthornes. They'd lose their jobs or worse." "Let me worry about that," Ethan said again. He stood and retrieved a saddle blanket from a hook on the wall, handing it to her. "For now, you need to rest. You can sleep up in the loft where you were hiding. It's not comfortable, but it's safe." Clara took the blanket, her fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent a strange warmth through her, something she hadn't felt in so long that it took her a moment to recognize it. Hope. He was giving her hope. "Ethan," she said softly, "why do you really believe me?" He looked at her for a long moment, and in the lamplight, his eyes seemed to soften. Because I've seen liars, Clara. I've seen murderers and thieves and every kind of criminal this territory has to offer. And when I look at you, that's not what I see. I see someone who's scared and running and telling the truth. The way he said her name, like it was something precious, made her chest tighten. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and climbed back up to the loft. As she settled into the hay with the blanket wrapped around her, she could hear Ethan moving around below, tending to the horses and banking the lamps. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear. She woke to dawn light filtering through the gaps in the stable walls and the smell of coffee brewing. Climbing down the ladder, she found Ethan sitting on the bench with 2 tin cups and a pot of coffee balanced on a small stove he must have brought in from outside. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a month," Clara admitted, taking the coffee gratefully. It was strong and hot, and it helped clear the fog from her mind. In the morning light, she could see Ethan more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. "I've been thinking about our plan," he said. "The bounty hunters will probably spend today searching White River. By tonight, if they don't find you, they'll move on to the next town. We should leave tomorrow morning before dawn. We'll head south first, then loop back west toward Wyoming. It'll take longer, but it'll throw them off our trail." Clara cupped her hands around the warm tin cup. "You've really thought this through?" "I used to track cattle rustlers for a living," Ethan said. "I know how hunters think. The key is to do the unexpected." "Used to?" Clara asked. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. "I gave it up. Too many innocent people got hurt because trackers were more interested in collecting bounties than finding the truth. I decided I'd rather work with horses than hunt human beings." There was that story again, lurking beneath his words. Clara wanted to ask more, but before she could, they heard voices outside the stable. Ethan was on his feet instantly, pressing a finger to his lips. Clara set down her coffee and quickly climbed back up to the loft, her heart pounding. The stable doors opened and a different voice called out, "Ethan, you in here?" "Over here, Sheriff," Ethan replied calmly. Clara's blood ran cold. The sheriff. She pressed herself deeper into the hay, barely daring to breathe. "I hear there's bounty hunters in town looking for some woman," the sheriff said. His voice was older, gravelly. "They came by my office last night asking questions. Said she killed someone down in Wyoming." "They stopped by here too," Ethan said. "I told them I hadn't seen anyone." There was a pause. "That the truth, Ethan?" Another pause, longer this time. Clara's heart was beating so hard she was sure they could hear it from below. "You ever known me to lie to you, Sheriff?" Ethan asked finally. The sheriff sighed. "No, I suppose not. But those bounty hunters are offering good money and times are hard. If you do see this woman, you'd be smart to turn her in and collect the reward." "I'll keep that in mind," Ethan said evenly. After the sheriff left, Clara waited a full 5 minutes before climbing down. Her hands were shaking again and she felt sick to her stomach. "He suspects something," she said. "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "But Sheriff Morrison is a good man. Even if he does suspect I'm hiding you, he won't act on it without proof. He's not the kind to arrest someone on a hunch." "You're taking a huge risk for me," Clara said. "If you're caught helping me, you could go to prison." Ethan met her eyes. "Some things are worth the risk." The way he looked at her when he said it made Clara's breath catch. There was something in his gaze, something warm and protective that made her feel things she had no business feeling. She was a fugitive, and he was the only thing standing between her and a noose. This was no time to be thinking about how his presence made her feel safe and alive in a way she had never experienced before. They spent the day in tense silence, listening to the sounds of the town outside. Twice more they heard horses and voices, and twice more Clara hid in the loft while Ethan deflected questions. By evening, the activity seemed to die down, and Ethan ventured out to gather supplies for their journey. He returned an hour later with saddlebags full of food, extra canteens, and a worn coat that he handed to Clara. "It gets cold at night this time of year," he explained. "You'll need this." Clara took the coat, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "How much did all this cost?" "I have no money to repay you." "I'm not asking for repayment," Ethan said. "Just focus on staying alive and proving your innocence. That'll be payment enough." That night, they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, sitting together on the bench as the last light faded from the sky. In the quiet darkness, Clara found herself telling Ethan things she had never told anyone. She told him about her childhood in Illinois, orphaned at 12 and sent to live with an aunt who resented every morsel she ate. She told him about learning to sew, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. She told him about going west to find work, about how excited she had been when the Blackthorn household had hired her. "I thought it was a blessing," she said bitterly. "A chance to make something of myself. Instead, it became a nightmare." Ethan listened without interrupting, his gray eyes reflecting the lamplight. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My father was accused of stealing horses," he said finally. "He was innocent, but the man who owned those horses was powerful and wanted someone to blame. My father was hanged when I was 16. My mother died of grief 6 months later. I spent years angry at the world, at the injustice of it all. That's why I became a tracker. I thought I could make things right, catch real criminals, bring them to justice. But the system is broken, Clara. Too often, it's not about truth. It's about power and money." Clara reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his. "I'm so sorry." Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then turned his palm up to squeeze her fingers gently. "So am I. But maybe we can make something right this time. Maybe we can prove that sometimes the truth does matter." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped in the darkness, drawing strength from each other. Clara felt something shifting inside her chest, something warm and frightening and wonderful all at once. She barely knew this man, but he had shown her more kindness and faith than anyone in her entire life. He had risked everything for her without asking for anything in return. How could she not feel something for him? They left White River before dawn the next morning, riding south under a sky full of stars. Clara rode her gray mare while Ethan rode a sturdy bay gelding, and they kept to back trails and avoided any towns. For 3 days, they traveled in relative silence, stopping only to rest the horses and grab a few hours of sleep. Ethan was constantly alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. On the 4th day, they made camp beside a stream, and Ethan declared it safe enough to have a fire. Clara helped him gather wood, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs and do something useful. As they worked side by side, she found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way his shoulder brushed against hers, the warmth of his hand when he helped her over a fallen log. "Tell me something," she said as they sat by the fire that evening, eating salt pork and beans. "What will you do after this is over, after we prove my innocence?" Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "You must have plans, dreams." He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I've always wanted to have my own ranch, nothing big, just enough land for a decent herd and some good horses. a place where I could build something that lasts." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said softly. "What about you?" Ethan asked. "If we clear your name, what will you do?" Clara had been so focused on survival that she hadn't allowed herself to think about the future. "I suppose I'll go back to sewing. It's the only skill I have." "You're good at it." "I'm very good at it," Clara said with a small smile. "I can make a dress that fits so perfectly it feels like a second skin. I can embroider patterns that look like paintings. It's the one thing I've always been proud of." "Then you'll have no trouble finding work," Ethan said. "A skilled seamstress can make a good living, especially in a growing territory." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. Clara found herself imagining what it would be like to have a normal life again, to wake up without fear, to pursue her craft without constantly looking over her shoulder. And in those imaginings, she kept seeing Ethan there beside her, his steady presence a constant source of comfort and strength. It took them 2 weeks to reach the edge of Wyoming territory, traveling slowly and carefully to avoid detection. They skirted around the larger towns and stuck to small settlements where strangers were less likely to be noticed. Ethan proved to be a skilled hunter, supplementing their supplies with rabbit and prairie hen, and Clara discovered she was better at outdoor cooking than she had thought. As they traveled, they talked about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Ethan had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, making her laugh when she least expected it. She learned that he was patient with the horses, gentle with injured animals they encountered, and had a surprisingly good singing voice that he only revealed when he thought she was asleep. She learned that he took the first watch every night and gave her the warmest blanket without ever mentioning it, and with each passing day, she felt herself falling deeper into feelings she knew were dangerous but couldn't seem to stop. The way her heart lifted when she saw him smile. The way her skin tingled when their hands accidentally touched. The way she found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, memorizing the line of his jaw and the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. One evening, as they made camp in a grove of cottonwood trees, a sudden storm rolled in. The rain came down in sheets, soaking them both before they could get the tent up. They huddled together under the canvas, shivering and laughing at their misfortune. "Some adventure this turned out to be," Clara said, wringing water from her hair. "Could be worse," Ethan replied, his eyes twinkling in the lightning flashes. "Could be snowing." "Don't even say that," Clara said, swatting his arm playfully. Their eyes met, and suddenly the laughter faded. They were sitting so close that Clara could feel the warmth radiating from Ethan's body, could see water droplets caught in his eyelashes. Her breath hitched as his gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Clara," he said softly, and her name had never sounded like that before, like a prayer and a question all at once. "Yes," she whispered. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Clara leaned into the touch without thinking. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said. "I know this isn't the right time, and God knows it's not the right situation, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." "Feel what?" Clara asked, though her heart was beating so hard she thought she knew the answer. "This," Ethan said simply. "You, every day we spend together, every conversation we have, every time I see you smile, I fall a little more. I know I shouldn't. I know you're dealing with enough without me adding my feelings to the mix. But I needed you to know that this, helping you, it stopped being about justice a long time ago. Now it's about you. About keeping you safe, because I can't imagine a world where you're not in it." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Ethan, I feel it too. I've been trying so hard not to because it seems impossible, but I can't help it. You've shown me what it means to be cared for, to be believed in. You've given me hope when I had none. How could I not fall in love with you?" The words hung in the air between them, and then Ethan was cupping her face in both hands and kissing her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Clara kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, pouring weeks of fear and loneliness and desperate hope into that kiss. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his embrace, finally allowing herself to feel safe and wanted and loved. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to clear your name," he said fiercely. "We're going to prove your innocence, and then we're going to build a life together. I promise you that." "I believe you," Clara whispered, and she did. They held each other as the storm raged outside, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Clara felt truly at peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed the world clean. They rode into Wyoming territory with renewed determination, heading toward the Blackthorn Ranch. Ethan had decided their best chance was to approach the servants who worked there, people who might have seen or heard something the night Thomas died. "We need to be careful," Ethan warned as they rode. "The Blackthorns will have people watching for you. We can't just walk up to the front door." "There's a woman who works in the kitchen," Clara said. "Her name is Martha Green. She was kind to me when I first arrived. If anyone would tell the truth, it would be her." "Then we find Martha Green," Ethan said. They made camp several miles from the Blackthorn property and spent 2 days watching the ranch from a distance, learning the patterns of activity. Ethan's experience as a tracker served them well. He could read the land and the movements of people with uncanny accuracy, predicting when the best time would be to approach without being seen. On the third evening, they spotted Martha leaving the ranch on foot, walking toward the small town a mile away. Ethan and Clara intercepted her on the road, stepping out from behind a stand of trees. Martha gasped and stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. "Please don't be afraid," Clara said quickly, pulling back the hood that had been hiding her face. "Martha, it's me, Clara Owens." "I need your help." Martha's eyes went wide. "Miss Clara, but they say you murdered Master Thomas. There's bounty hunters everywhere looking for you." "I didn't kill him," Clara said desperately. "It was an accident, Martha. He tried to force himself on me and I fought him off. He fell and hit his head. I swear to you I didn't mean for him to die." Martha looked between Clara and Ethan, her expression torn. "I don't know. Mr. Blackthorn, he's been like a man possessed since Thomas died. He's sworn to see you hang." "Please," Ethan said, his voice calm but urgent. "We just need the truth. Were you in the house that night? Did you see or hear anything?" Martha bit her lip, clearly struggling with herself. Finally, she said, "I heard shouting. I was in the kitchen and I heard Master Thomas and Miss Clara arguing. I heard her say no, heard her tell him to stop. Then there was a crash and Master Thomas went quiet." "Did you tell anyone this?" Clara asked. "I tried," Martha said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "I told Mr. Blackthorn what I heard, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was mistaken, that his son would never do such a thing. He threatened to fire me and blacklist me from working anywhere in the territory if I repeated my story. I have 3 children, Miss Clara. I can't lose my position." Clara felt her heart sink, but Ethan stepped forward. "Martha, I understand you're afraid. But an innocent woman is going to hang if someone doesn't tell the truth. Is there anyone else who might have seen or heard something? Anyone who might be willing to speak up?" Martha hesitated, then said quietly, "There's a stable hand named Joe. He was outside the window that night, tending to a lame horse. He might have seen something, but he's even more scared than I am. He's got a record, you see, did some time for petty theft when he was younger. If he goes against Mr. Blackthorne, he'll end up back in prison on trumped-up charges." "Where can we find Joe?" Ethan asked. "He sleeps in the stable loft. But please, you have to be careful. There's guards everywhere, and if they catch you on Blackthorne property, they'll shoot first and ask questions later." They thanked Martha and watched her hurry away toward town, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Clara felt a mixture of hope and dread. They had found someone who could corroborate her story, but getting that testimony seemed nearly impossible. "We need to talk to this Joe," Ethan said. "Tonight when everyone's asleep." "It's too dangerous," Clara protested. "If you're caught, you'll be arrested." Ethan took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with fierce determination. "Clara, we've come this far. We're not giving up now. I'll be careful, I promise. But we need that testimony." They waited until well after midnight when the ranch had gone quiet. Ethan left Clara hidden in the trees with the horses and made his way silently toward the stables. Clara watched him go, her heart in her throat, praying to every deity she could think of to keep him safe. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. She was just starting to consider going after him when she saw his figure emerging from the darkness, moving quickly but quietly back toward her. "Did you find him?" she whispered as soon as he was close enough. "I did," Ethan said, slightly out of breath. "And you're not going to believe what he told me. Joe saw everything through the window. He saw Thomas attack you, saw you fight him off, saw Thomas fall and hit his head. He was about to go for help when Thomas's father came into the room." Joe watched Blackthorne check his son's pulse and realize he was dead. Then Blackthorne saw the money on the table, money that Thomas had been counting earlier. Blackthorne took that money and hid it in his own desk, then called for the other servants. That's when he accused you of murder and theft. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "He knew. Thomas's father knew it was an accident and he framed me anyway." "It gets worse," Ethan said grimly. "Joe said he overheard Blackthorne talking to one of his foremen the next day. Blackthorne said his son had always been reckless and stupid, and that his death was probably inevitable. But he saw an opportunity to get rid of you because you were a witness to Thomas's true character. If you testified about what Thomas tried to do, it would ruin the Blackthorne name. So he made you into a murderer instead." Fury unlike anything Clara had ever felt before rose up inside her. She had been running for her life, living in fear and desperation, all because a powerful man wanted to protect his family's reputation. "We need to get Joe to talk to a federal marshal," Clara said. "He's willing to do it," Ethan said, "but he's terrified. He wants protection and he wants assurance that he won't be charged as an accessory for not speaking up sooner. Can we promise him that?" "I know a federal marshal in Cheyenne," Ethan said. "His name is Marshal Cooper, and he's one of the few lawmen I still trust. If we can get Joe to Cheyenne and get his testimony on record, Cooper will make sure he's protected." Over the next 2 days, they worked out a careful plan. Ethan would return to the Blackthorne Ranch and smuggle Joe out during the confusion of the morning routines. Meanwhile, Clara would wait with the horses at a predetermined meeting point. Then they would all ride hard for Cheyenne, staying ahead of any pursuit. The plan went smoothly at first. Ethan managed to get Joe out of the stable without being noticed, and they met up with Clara just after dawn. Joe was a nervous young man of about 20, with red hair and freckles and eyes that darted around like a trapped animal's. But as they rode, and as Ethan kept reassuring him that he was doing the right thing, Joe began to relax slightly. They were a day's ride from Cheyenne when disaster struck. They had stopped at a stream to water the horses when Clara heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the click of a gun being cocked. "Well, well," a voice drawled. Looks like we finally caught up with you, Clara Owens. Clara spun around to see 3 men on horseback surrounding their camp. Bounty hunters, guns drawn and pointed directly at her. Ethan moved instinctively to put himself between Clara and the guns, but one of the hunters laughed. "Don't be a hero, Cowboy. You're already in enough trouble for harboring a fugitive. Step aside and maybe we'll let you live." "She's innocent," Ethan said, his voice hard as steel. "We have a witness who can prove it." "We don't care about innocent or guilty," another hunter said. "We care about the $1,000 on her head. Now step aside or we'll shoot you both and take her in anyway." Time seemed to slow down. Clara saw Ethan's hand move toward his gun, saw the bounty hunter's finger tighten on the trigger. She screamed, lunging forward to push Ethan out of the way. The gun went off with a deafening crack, and Clara felt a burning pain across her upper arm. She stumbled, and Ethan caught her, his face going white with fury and fear. What happened next was a blur. Ethan drew his gun with lightning speed and fired, hitting the shooter's hand and sending his weapon flying. Joe, who had been frozen in terror, suddenly grabbed a heavy branch and swung it at another hunter, knocking him from his horse. The third hunter hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance, and in that moment of hesitation, Ethan had his gun trained on him. "Drop it," Ethan commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Drop it now or I will shoot you." The hunter dropped his gun, raising his hands. The other 2 were groaning on the ground, disarmed and no longer a threat. Ethan quickly gathered their weapons while keeping his gun trained on them, then turned to Clara. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Clara looked down at her arm. Blood was seeping through her sleeve, but the wound didn't seem too deep. "It just grazed me," she said. "I'm all right." "You're not all right," Ethan said fiercely. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Clara shot back. "I wasn't going to let them shoot you." For a moment their eyes locked, and Clara saw raw emotion in Ethan's face, love and fear and anger all mixed together. Then Joe cleared his throat nervously. "What do we do with them?" he asked, gesturing to the bounty hunters. Ethan thought for a moment. "We tie them up and leave them here. By the time they get free, we'll be in Cheyenne with the marshal. They can explain to him why they tried to murder an innocent woman." They worked quickly, using rope from the hunters' own saddlebags to bind them securely. Then Ethan tended to Clara's arm, wrapping it with clean cloth from their supplies. His hands were gentle, but his jaw was tight with suppressed emotion. "You should have stayed behind me," he said quietly as he worked, "and let you get shot." "Never," Clara replied. Ethan looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he said. "Promise me." "I promise if you promise the same," Clara said. He smiled slightly, though his eyes were still serious. "Deal." They rode into Cheyenne late that evening, dusty and exhausted. Ethan led them straight to the marshal's office, a sturdy brick building on the main street. Marshal Cooper was a tall man with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades of hard experience. When Ethan explained the situation, Cooper listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes studying each of them in turn. "That's quite a story," he said when Ethan finished. "And you're willing to testify to all of this under oath?" he asked Joe. Joe nodded, though his hands were shaking. "Yes, sir. I'll tell the truth about what I saw that night. Miss Clara never murdered anyone, and Mr. Blackthorne framed her to protect his family name." Marshal Cooper turned to Clara. "And you're Clara Owens, the woman wanted for the murder of Thomas Blackthorne?" "Yes, sir," Clara said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "But I didn't murder him. It was an accident when he tried to assault me." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. I've heard stories about Thomas Blackthorne and his behavior with women." Most people were too afraid of his father to speak up, but the stories were there. "Ethan, you say there's also a witness who heard the assault," Martha Green, a cook at the Blackthorn Ranch, Ethan confirmed. She heard Clara saying no, heard the struggle. She tried to tell Blackthorn Sr., but he threatened her into silence. "I'll send deputies to get her testimony as well," Marshal Cooper said. He stood and came around the desk, looking at Clara with something like kindness. "Miss Owens, I'm going to take your statement and Joe's statement tonight. Then I'm going to wire the territorial governor's office and explain the situation. It may take a few days, but I'll make sure the bounty on you is lifted and the charges are dropped. In the meantime, you'll need to stay in Cheyenne where I can guarantee your safety." Clara felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Clara stayed in a boarding house under the protection of the marshal's office, while Ethan and Joe gave their statements, and Cooper's deputies rode out to collect testimony from Martha Green. Ethan visited Clara every day, bringing her food and news and just sitting with her, holding her hand and reminding her that this would all be over soon. On the fourth day, Marshal Cooper came to the boarding house himself, a piece of paper in his hand and a smile on his weathered face. "It's done," he said simply, handing Clara the paper. "The governor has reviewed the evidence and witness statements. The charges against you have been dropped and the bounty has been lifted. You're a free woman, Miss Owens." Clara stared at the paper, reading the official words that declared her innocent, and then she started crying. But these were tears of joy, of relief so profound it felt like her body couldn't contain it. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she sobbed into his chest. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's finally over." When Clara could finally speak, she pulled back and looked up at him. "What about Blackthorn? Will he face consequences for what he did?" "Marshal Cooper is pursuing charges for obstruction of justice and filing false reports," Ethan said. "It won't bring Thomas back, but it'll tarnish the Blackthorn name and strip him of some of his power. That's something, at least." It was something. It was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless. Clara had her freedom and her name back. She had her life back. "So what now?" she asked, looking between Ethan and the marshal. "Now you get to decide what you want to do with your future," Marshal Cooper said kindly. "You can go anywhere, do anything. You're free." Clara looked at Ethan and she saw in his eyes the same question she was feeling. What did they want? Where did they go from here? "I need to talk to Ethan," she said. "Alone, if that's all right." Marshal Cooper tipped his hat and left, and Clara and Ethan were alone in the small boarding house room. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Clara felt her heart racing. "I meant what I said during the storm," Ethan said quietly, "about wanting to build a life with you. That hasn't changed. If anything, everything we've been through has made me more certain. I love you, Clara. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Clara felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but she was smiling through them. "I love you too. God help me. I fell in love with you somewhere between White River and here, and I can't imagine my life without you in it now." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Then marry me. Be my wife. We'll go somewhere new, somewhere where neither of us has a past to haunt us. We'll start fresh together. I'll work on building that ranch I told you about, and you can sew dresses for every woman in the territory if you want. We'll build a life that's ours, based on truth and trust and love." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the Cheyenne courthouse, with Marshal Cooper and Joe serving as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress, her best one from the few belongings she still had, and Ethan wore a clean shirt and his best vest. They exchanged simple gold bands that Ethan had bought from a jeweler in town, and when the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that Clara thought her heart would burst from happiness. They spent their wedding night in a hotel room that Ethan had splurged on, with a real bed and clean sheets and a view of the mountains in the distance. He was gentle and patient with her, and Clara discovered that love and passion together were something more profound than she had ever imagined. They talked late into the night, making plans for their future, and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. They left Cheyenne the next morning, riding north and west toward Montana territory. Ethan had heard of good land available there, near a growing town called Billings. It would be a fresh start for both of them, far enough from Wyoming that Clara could truly put the nightmare behind her. The journey took 3 weeks, but it felt different from their desperate flight to Cheyenne. Now they could take their time, stopping to appreciate the beauty of the landscape, camping under the stars without fear. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in years, and Ethan's smiles came easier and more frequently. They were building something already, a foundation of shared experiences and growing intimacy. They reached the Billings area in late September of 1881. The land was beautiful, with rolling hills and good grass for cattle, and the town itself was small but growing. Ethan found a piece of property for sale about 5 miles outside of town, 160 acres with a small creek running through it. The price was more than fair, and he bought it immediately. "It's not much yet," he said as they stood on their new land, looking out over the grass and hills. "But we'll build something here, something that lasts." "It's perfect," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "It's home." They spent the fall building a small cabin with help from their new neighbors who were friendly and welcoming. Clara discovered that she enjoyed the physical labor of construction, the satisfaction of seeing their home take shape board by board. When winter came, they had a snug cabin with a good fireplace and a loft for sleeping, and Ethan had started building a barn for the horses and the small herd of cattle he planned to buy in the spring. Clara set up a sewing area by the window where the light was best, and word quickly spread through Billings that a talented seamstress had arrived. Women began coming to her for dresses and alterations, and Clara found joy in her craft again. She made beautiful things with her hands, and people paid her fairly for them. It was honest work, satisfying work, and it helped build their savings. That first winter was hard but happy. They had little money and had to be careful with every purchase, but they had each other, and that was enough. Clara learned to cook over an open fire and make do with limited supplies. Ethan proved to be a skilled carpenter and hunter, providing meat and improving their cabin with each passing week. They spent long evenings by the fireplace, talking and reading and simply being together. Spring brought new life to the land and new opportunities. Ethan bought 20 head of cattle and began building his herd. He also started breaking horses, using his skills to train young Mustangs that could be sold for good prices. Clara's sewing business continued to grow, and she began taking orders from women in neighboring towns as well. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, Clara placed her hand over Ethan's and said, "I have something to tell you." He turned to look at her, and she saw concern in his eyes. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right," Clara said, smiling. "Ethan, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, and Clara held her breath. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down gently as if suddenly afraid he might hurt her. "A baby," he said wonderingly. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Ethan said. He pulled her close, resting his hand on her still flat stomach. A child, our child, Clara, you've given me everything. A future, a home, and now this. I love you so much. I love you too, Clara whispered, leaning into his embrace. Their son was born in December of 1882, arriving with the first snowfall of winter. They named him Thomas, not after the man who had inadvertently caused so much pain, but after Ethan's father who had died unjustly. It felt like a way of reclaiming the name, of honoring a good man rather than a troubled one. Thomas was a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and Clara had never experienced love like the love she felt holding her son for the first time. Ethan was a devoted father from the start, helping with feedings in the night and walking the floor with Thomas when he cried. Watching her husband with their baby, Clara felt her heart could hardly contain all the love she felt. The years passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. The ranch grew steadily. Ethan's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Montana territory, and he had more work than he could handle. Clara's sewing business thrived as well, and she eventually took on an apprentice, a young woman from town who wanted to learn the craft. In 1884, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination, and she kept her older brother on his toes from the moment she could crawl. 2 years later, another son arrived, a quiet, thoughtful boy they named James. The ranch that had started as 160 acres grew to over 300 as Ethan bought adjoining properties. The small cabin was expanded and improved until it was a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a parlor where Clara could receive her sewing clients. The barn that Ethan had built by himself with help from neighbors became part of a complex of outbuildings that included a bunkhouse for the hands they hired during busy seasons. Through it all, Clara and Ethan's love deepened and matured. They had their challenges, of course. There were hard winters when they worried about losing cattle, and a drought one summer that nearly broke them. There were arguments and disagreements, times when the stress of raising children and running a ranch tested their patience. But through everything, they remained committed to each other, to the life they were building together. Clara never forgot where she had come from, the terror of running from a bounty she didn't deserve. She used her experience to help others when she could. When a drifter showed up at their door claiming to be innocent of the crime he was accused of, Clara and Ethan helped him get to authorities who would listen. They contributed money to legal defense funds for people who couldn't afford lawyers. They spoke out against injustice when they saw it, using the respect they had earned in their community to advocate for fairness and truth. One evening in the spring of 1890, Clara stood on the porch of their home watching her children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, tall and strong like his father, helping his younger siblings build a fort out of hay bales. Sarah at 5 was bossy and creative, directing her brothers with the confidence of someone twice her age. James at 3 was the peacemaker, toddling between his siblings and trying to make everyone happy. Ethan came up behind Clara and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Clara said, leaning back into his embrace. 9 years ago I was running for my life, terrified and alone, and now look at us. We have a home, a family, a life better than anything I ever dreamed was possible. We built this together, Ethan reminded her. Every bit of it. You saved me, Clara said softly. Not just from the bounty hunters and the false charges. You saved me from giving up on hope, on believing that good things could happen. You showed me what love really means." Ethan turned her in his arms so she was facing him. The gray eyes that had first captured her attention all those years ago were still as intense, still made her heart skip a beat. "We saved each other," he said. "I was going through the motions of living before you came into my life. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something that matters. Every day I wake up next to you, I thank God for the moment you rode into my stable asking for help." Clara reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "I love you, Ethan Lawson. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Clara Lawson," Ethan replied. "You're my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Everything I have, everything I am belongs to you." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, and Clara felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt when he first kissed her in that tent during the rainstorm. Some things never changed. Some loves were meant to last forever. That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara and Ethan sat by the fireplace in their parlor. Clara was working on embroidering a tablecloth for a client in town, and Ethan was reviewing the ranch accounts. It was a peaceful, domestic scene, the kind Clara had never imagined she would have. "I got a letter today," Ethan said suddenly, "from Marshall Cooper in Cheyenne." Clara looked up from her embroidery. They still corresponded with the marshal occasionally, staying in touch with the man who had helped give them their chance at happiness. "What did he say?" she asked. "He wanted to let us know that Clarence Blackthorne died last month," Ethan said carefully. "Apparently, he never recovered from the scandal of falsely accusing you. His ranch was sold off piece by piece to pay debts, and he died alone and bitter." Clara set down her embroidery, absorbing this information. She expected to feel something, satisfaction perhaps, or vindication. Instead, she just felt sad for a man who had let pride and anger destroy his life. "I don't wish he had suffered," she said finally. "I just wish he had told the truth from the beginning. So much pain could have been avoided." "That's because you have a kind heart," Ethan said. "It's one of the things I love most about you." They were quiet for a moment, then Clara said, "Marshall Cooper also helped save our lives. We should invite him to visit. I'd like our children to meet him, to understand what he did for us." "That's a wonderful idea," Ethan agreed. Marshall Cooper did visit that summer, and he stayed for a week. The children were fascinated by his stories of being a lawman, and he was charmed by their enthusiasm and energy. On his last evening with them, as they all sat around the dinner table, he raised his glass in a toast. "To the Lawson family," he said. "May you always remember that truth and justice are worth fighting for, and that love can overcome even the darkest circumstances." They all raised their glasses, even little James, who was drinking milk, and Clara felt a swell of emotion in her chest. This was her family, these were her people, and this was the life she had fought so hard to achieve. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch and showed every sign of taking over its management one day. Sarah developed a passion for horses that rivaled her father's, and she had a natural talent for training them. James surprised everyone by showing an interest in law, inspired by stories of Marshall Cooper and the fight for his mother's innocence. Clara and Ethan grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines earned through years of laughter and hard work. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences, and the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting together. In the summer of 1895, they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and there was music and dancing and food prepared by Clara with help from her now-grown children. As the sun set and someone started playing a fiddle, Ethan took Clara's hand and led her in a dance under the stars. "You remember our wedding night?" he asked as they swayed together. "When we talked about all the things we wanted to build." "I remember," Clara said. "We've accomplished more than we ever dreamed back then." "Not quite everything," Ethan said with a smile. "You remember how I said I wanted land enough for a good herd and some horses? Well, we've got that and more, but there was something else I dreamed about." "What was that?" Clara asked. "Growing old with you," Ethan said simply. "Watching our children grow, maybe having grandchildren one day. Building a legacy that lasts beyond our lifetimes. That's what I really wanted, and that's what we're doing." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, good tears full of joy and gratitude. "We've been so blessed, haven't we?" "More than blessed," Ethan agreed. "We've been given a second chance at life, and we've made the most of it. I wouldn't change a single thing about our journey, not even the hard parts. They all led us here." As they danced, surrounded by their children and friends, under a sky full of stars, Clara thought back to that terrified woman who had ridden into a stable in White River, South Dakota, begging for help from a stranger. She thought about how one act of kindness, one person willing to believe in her innocence, had changed the entire course of her life. She thought about the love that had grown between two broken people who had found healing in each other. She thought about the family they had built, the home they had created, the legacy they were leaving. And she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of fear and struggle had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan as the music swirled around them. "For what?" he asked. "For believing in me, for hiding me when I had nowhere else to go, for proving my innocence, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." Ethan pulled her closer and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You gave me just as much," he said softly. "You gave me purpose and hope and love. You gave me a reason to be a better man. Thank you for trusting me all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to accept my help. Thank you for loving me back." They stayed like that, swaying together under the stars while the party continued around them. Their children were laughing nearby, their land stretched out around them fertile and productive. Their home stood solid and welcoming behind them. It was everything they had fought for, everything they had dreamed of, and so much more. The night grew late, and eventually the guests began to leave, calling out their thanks and well wishes. The children helped clean up, then headed to their own rooms, leaving Clara and Ethan alone on the porch in the cool night air. "I have something for you," Ethan said suddenly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. Clara unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful silver locket. She opened it and found two tiny photographs inside, one of her and one of Ethan, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through the previous year. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I wanted you to have something that would remind you that no matter what, we're always together," Ethan said. "Even when we're apart, even when times are hard, we carry each other in our hearts." Clara fastened the locket around her neck, then pulled Ethan into a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't express. After all these years, he still made her heart race, still made her feel safe and loved and cherished. "Come to bed," she said when they finally pulled apart. "Let's go count our blessings one more time." They walked into their home together, hand in hand, closing the door on another perfect day. Outside, the Montana night was peaceful and still, the stars shining down on the ranch that two people had built from nothing but faith and love and hard work. In the years that followed, Thomas did indeed take over the management of the ranch, running it with the same dedication and integrity, his parents had shown. He married a kind woman from town, and they gave Clara and Ethan their first grandchildren, twin girls who had their grandmother's green eyes and their grandfather's stubborn streak. Sarah became known throughout Montana Territory as one of the finest horse trainers in the region, working alongside her father, and then eventually starting her own training operation on land adjacent to the family ranch. She married later in life to a veterinarian who shared her love of animals, and they had 3 sons who grew up as comfortable in a saddle as they were on their own feet. James pursued his interest in law, studying with a lawyer in Billings, before going on to proper law school back east. He returned to Montana and became a lawyer dedicated to defending those who couldn't afford proper representation, carrying on his parents' commitment to justice and fairness. He married a schoolteacher, and they had 2 daughters who inherited their father's passion for education and justice. Clara continued sewing well into her later years, though she eventually passed the bulk of the work to her apprentices. She found joy in teaching young women her craft, passing on not just the technical skills but also the satisfaction of creating beautiful things with your own hands. She became known as a mentor and wise woman in the community, someone people came to for advice and comfort. Ethan remained active on the ranch until his 70s, only gradually turning over more and more responsibility to Thomas and Sarah. He never lost his love of horses, and even in his later years, he could often be found in the corral, working with a particularly challenging young Mustang or just spending time with the animals he loved. As they grew older together, Clara and Ethan developed the kind of comfortable companionship that comes from decades of shared life. They could communicate with just a glance, finish each other's sentences, anticipate each other's needs. But the passion between them never faded entirely. Even in their 70s, they could still make each other laugh, could still surprise each other with small gestures of love and tenderness. One evening in the spring of 1910, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch of their home as they had done countless times before. They were in their late 60s now, their children grown and thriving, their grandchildren starting families of their own. The ranch stretched out before them, more prosperous and beautiful than they had ever imagined it could be. "You ever think about that night in White River?" Clara asked suddenly. "When I came riding into your stable," Ethan smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I think about it all the time. That was the night my real life began." "Mine too," Clara said. She reached over and took his hand, marveling as she always did at how perfectly it fit in hers. "I was so scared that night. I thought my life was over. I never could have imagined that it was just beginning." "You were so brave," Ethan said. "Even terrified and running for your life, you had this strength about you, this determination to survive. I saw that right away, and I knew I couldn't let anything happen to you." "And then you fell in love with me," Clara said with a smile. "I think I fell in love with you that very first night," Ethan admitted. "I just didn't realize it yet. But when you looked at me with those green eyes and asked for help, something in my heart recognized something in yours. We were meant to find each other, Clara. I truly believe that." "So do I," Clara said softly. "Out of all the stables in all the towns in the West, I rode into yours. If that's not fate, I don't know what is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over their land. Then Ethan said, "I want you to know something, Clara. These past 29 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Every moment, even the hard ones, has been precious because I got to share them with you. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't. I'd choose you all over again, 1,000 times over." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I'd choose you too, every single time. You saved me, Ethan, not just from the bounty, but from a life without love, without hope, without joy. You showed me what it means to be truly cherished. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. How could I ever thank you enough for that? You don't need to thank me, Ethan said, turning to face her fully. His gray eyes, though faded with age, still held that same intensity that had captured her heart so long ago. Loving you has been its own reward. Being loved by you has been my greatest honor. He leaned in and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Clara kissed him back with all the love in her heart. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, he could still make her feel like a young woman falling in love for the first time. That night, as they lay in bed together, Clara rested her head on Ethan's chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His arm was around her, holding her close, just as it had on their wedding night and every night since. "I love you, Ethan Lawson," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you, Clara Lawson," he whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and always." Clara closed her eyes, feeling more content and at peace than she ever had. She thought about the long journey that had brought them here, from that desperate night in White River to this moment of perfect happiness. She thought about all the challenges they had overcome, all the joy they had shared, all the love they had built. She thought about their children and grandchildren, the legacy of love and justice and integrity that they were passing down through the generations. She thought about the ranch, the land that they had cultivated and nurtured, that would continue long after they were gone. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that her life had been exactly what it was meant to be. The bounty she had fled, the terror she had endured, the struggle to prove her innocence, it had all led her to Ethan, to this life, to this moment. And she wouldn't change a single thing. As she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man she loved, Clara Lawson felt nothing but gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her home. The years continued their steady march, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that come with a life well lived. Clara and Ethan celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1931, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Their children organized a grand party on the ranch, with people traveling from across Montana, and even from neighboring states, to celebrate the couple who had become something of a legend in the region. Stories were told that day about Clara and Ethan's early struggles, their fight for justice, and the empire of love and prosperity they had built together. Their grandchildren listened with wide eyes to tales of bounty hunters and narrow escapes, of a cowboy who had risked everything to protect an innocent woman, of love that had overcome impossible odds. Ethan gave a speech that day, his voice still strong despite his 80 years. 50 years ago, I married the love of my life," he said, looking at Clara with eyes full of devotion. "She came into my life like a whirlwind, turning everything upside down in the best possible way. She's been my partner, my best friend, my reason for being. Everything good in my life I owe to her. Clara, thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for loving me." Clara stood beside him, tears streaming down her weathered face, and took his hand. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would," she said. "Thank you for hiding me, for fighting for me, for proving my innocence. Thank you for showing me what love really means. My life began the day I rode into your stable, and every day since has been a gift." They kissed then, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered, and it was clear to all who witnessed it that their love had not dimmed one bit over 5 decades. Clara and Ethan lived several more years, continuing to be active in their family and community. They saw their great-grandchildren born, watched their family tree continue to grow and branch out. They remained devoted to each other until the very end, never spending a night apart if they could help it. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1935, at the age of 84, with Clara holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but without bitterness, knowing that they had been blessed with more years together than most couples could ever hope for. She lived another 5 years, staying active and engaged with her family, before joining her beloved husband in eternal rest. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a shared headstone that read simply, Ethan and Clara Lawson. Together in life, together in death, together always. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, and the story of Clara and Ethan became family legend, passed down through generations. It was a story about courage and justice, about fighting for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. But most of all, it was a story about love, the kind of love that changes everything, that builds empires, that lasts beyond death itself. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Clara Owens had been fleeing a bounty she didn't deserve when she rode into a stable in White River, South Dakota in 1881. Ethan Lawson had hidden her and proved her innocence, giving her back her freedom and her life. But what they had given each other was so much more than that. They had given each other love, true and deep and lasting. They had given each other a future when both had thought they had none. They had given each other everything. Their story lived on in the hearts of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that one act of kindness, one moment of believing in someone, can change not just one life but generations to come. The ranch still stands today, still run by Lawson descendants, a testament to what two people can build when they have faith in each other and love as their foundation. And if you listen carefully on quiet evenings, some say you can still feel the presence of Clara and Ethan there, watching over the land they loved, together as they always were, as they always would be forever.